Cliff Barrowman, please.
Should full details of discussions between George Bush and Tony Blair in respect of the Iraq War be made public?
This is the row that's been going on over the Chilcot report on the origins of the Iraq War and the decision that was announced today in a letter that they have now reached an agreement on what can and can't be published, put into the public domain. Who would like to start on this? Piers Morgan, you start on it, because you're...
Well, when I was editor of the Daily Mirror, we fought long and hard a campaign against the Iraq War. It was unsuccessful, but nothing that's happened since in Iraq has persuaded me that it was not a valid campaign, and I hoped it had been successful. And I had lots of dealings with Tony Blair at the time at Downing Street, and was into his mind a little bit about what was going on. And I always believed... my brother was fighting for the British Army in Basra, so I had a vested interest on all sides of this. And I always believed that basically Tony Blair had said to George Bush, I'm in whatever happens. And I believe when he didn't get the second UN resolution that he had already told George Bush and the Americans were going in. And that, to me, turned our involvement in the Iraq War into an illegal involvement in the Iraq War. And I think that what you're seeing now, in terms of selective details of the conversations between the British Prime Minister and the American President, is absolutely outrageous. That we are not going to get all the details which can determine once and for all whether that agreement was made without authorisation from the British Parliament or not. And I think there's only one reason we're not getting them, and it's a bad reason. And it's because the details that are contained in those conversations would be deeply embarrassing to Tony Blair, not so embarrassing to the Americans, because I don't think they care as much as we do about it, but to the British Prime Minister Tony Blair at the time, who led us into that war, a war that I believe was illegal. I think this is fundamentally important, and we as the British public have an absolute right to see the details of those conversations.
But he said last week... He said last week, it's certainly not me who's holding it up. The sooner it's published, the better.
Well, somebody's holding it up. And Tony Blair can say that, perhaps with the safety of knowledge. I don't know. I don't think it's Tony Blair personally. Maybe he has knowledge that we don't about what has been going on behind the scenes. But I don't think there's anyone in this room or anyone watching at home who, when they heard today that we are not going to get the details of those conversations, didn't think this stinks.
Yeah. I mean, I can't understand what the point of the Chilcot inquiry is if we're not going to get the full truth. I mean, we've obviously been involved in the Hillsborough sort of campaign that was going on a while back and is still ongoing. It smells a little bit of the same about what was going on. I mean, you can't give information but say, well, we're only going to give select information. If it's going to be the truth, it has to be the whole truth, and you can't redact stuff. I mean, I've read on the way over that it's over 100 pages, you know, of direct conversations between Blair and Bush in the lead up to us going into the war. I mean, how can we... What is the point of the inquiry if they don't have this information?
I agree with Piers and Joey. I think we have a... You'll be glad to know. We have a fundamental right, don't we, as British people, to know what is in those papers. I mean, our men and women in the armed forces went out and fought and died because of those decisions. And I think it again highlights the disconnect between the politicians and the public. They forget that they work for us, actually. We've elected them into office, and they're public servants there on our behalf. And we have a fundamental right to know why we were taken into what I believe was an illegal war. And I mean, I think it's really quite insulting, actually, to say that we will only get the gist, we will only get excerpts of what was talked about. I think that's absolutely disgusting.
Right. Louise, let's see what the government say about it.
Margaret Curran, a Labour supporter and supporter of Tony Blair. Why do you think it's not all being published, and why has Sir John Chilcot apparently accepted that it won't all be published?
I've not seen all the details of what has actually been said today. I think I saw the word "just" being used, and it won't be everything. It'll be some excerpts from it. I think that's my understanding of what's happened. I mean, I think the principle of disclosure is important, and I think the principle of, and that's what Chilcot is actually trying to do for the British people, and broader, I suppose, more broadly. And I think some of the previous inquiries have tried to do that. The people are aware of what happened in Iraq and why we went to war, why leaderships and governments behaved that they did. I assume that part of the explanation for not full disclosure is about secrecy and protocols of government and secret shared security protections on that basis, and that's part of the explanation. But I would have to say that Tony Blair has been through full investigation through Chilcot and through some of the other inquiries. It is obviously still a deeply important issue to Britain, and obviously, of course, to the armed services who serve so significantly for us. And I do understand the depth of feeling there still is about Iraq and the legacy of it. But I think we would need to look and see the security arguments as to why there's not full disclosure.
But it doesn't seem to be just security. For instance, there's a line in it about not attempting to explain George Bush's position, which is very curious.
Well, sure, I presume that's because the Americans have to explain their own position.
OK, what about explaining Tony Blair's position?
Well, I think that this is what has to be explained.
But if they don't quote, if you don't quote from telephone conversations, you just give the gist of a telephone conversation, you know what that means. That's what people do in ordinary life. They give the gist of something, and you don't get a real flavour of what the people were saying.
That may not necessarily be the case. I don't think you can imply from that in any way they are misleading or deceitful. I think you would. There has to be a guarantee that it's the truth that's being exchanged, but just not the whole extent of it.
Do you not think the families of those soldiers or people who served in the war who died have the right to see why their children's lives were lost?
Of course, and they need that explanation.
So we must have full disclosure.
But that's what Chilcot is about, and I do think you're going to get the reasons why and the basis of the conversations is going to be revealed.
We can't,
and that's
to protect Anglo-American relations, we can't just say, oh, well, we can't show that because it will damage this, it will be the secrecy. There's people who've lost the sons and daughters. They have the right to know why their lives were taken. OK,
you said the spectacles there in the check shirt, yes.
Your party took us against the will of the people into an illegal war. We deserve to know, the people of the world deserve to know what happened. We're not going to get it. We don't deserve to get a gist. You work for us. We deserve to know every single thing that went wrong, why we spent billions going into an illegal war that has done nothing for the world and has actually worsened our national security.
David Willetts. Well, I think that do you agree with him?
I don't believe that the war was illegal, no. But I do think there's all the key questions that people are asking about the war. And Piers put a very fair and crucial question, which is what exactly was going on between Prime Minister Blair and President Bush, and what assurances or deals were being done. I think that is a crucial part of Chilcot. And we do need to know that. That is absolutely essential. And the Chilcot inquiry is an independent inquiry. It's not, and I believe that the people on that Chilcot inquiry are going to try to get to the bottom of that.
But hang on, so wait a minute, just on that point, why has he then accepted the deal that he's been offered of simply giving the gist of conversations? He's written to the Cabinet Secretary saying, I accept this is working.
I don't know what has been the details of this arrangement. My understanding
but
is
should
that
we
he
not
can
know
quote...
the details?
My understanding of what has been agreed between Chilcot and Prime Minister Blair is that there will be extracts, so that there will be real words in quotation marks, that no, not be simply the gist, but it will not be a transcript of everything that was said between Blair and Bush. And I would assume, I don't know, but I would assume that one of the issues is what is going to happen in any future conversation between a British Prime Minister
and an overseas... It was 130 direct conversations between Bush and Blair in the build-up to the...
And I absolutely agree, and you're quite correct what you say about the parents of people who died needing to know everything about the circumstances of this war. The question is whether we can answer that question, which is absolutely right and crucial, whilst at the same time, a future American president able to say things to a British Prime Minister without his feeling that what I say in the next few years is going to appear in a transcript. Because if that, I assume, and I'm not privy to these discussions, I assume that one of the issues is what kind of conversation. When our Prime Minister is talking to President Obama next week about what they're going to try to do in Nigeria to help with the security issue of the school kids that have been abducted in Nigeria. At what point can people say this is a conversation that we're having in confidence? Now, someone has to reach that judgment. It's a difficult judgment, and I'm not privy to it, but clearly Blair and Chilcot have tried to reach some kind of agreement.
Hang on a second. When you have a war that is fought on what turns out to be an entirely false pretext, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, I've never accused Tony Blair of lying. I think he probably did believe that Saddam had those weapons. I'm sure George Bush believed it too. But when it turned out that he demonstrably did not have them, at that point, this inquiry becomes incredibly important, because the lives that Joey talked about are people who've lost them on a false pretext. The soldiers, including my brother, who went on the front line and risked their lives and in some cases gave their lives, they are doing it then for the wrong reasons. And that's why this transcript could clear up whether Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, gave assurances which he did not share with the British people or with the British Parliament. And if you don't reveal them, everyone's going to assume that is what's on them.
And just to pick up on one point, David, you say that it was an agreement made with Tony Blair, but actually the letter Chilcot has written is written to the present Cabinet Secretary,
and he is
Hayward, and
and he has responsibility. He is not a party figure. He has responsibility for the crucial question, which shouldn't be decided by any politician, which is, are there any conversations that a British Prime Minister can have with the President of the US that the President of the US should be able to think that text is not going to be revealed?
And we should never know the answer to
the
that.
challenge is whether Chilcot can answer the crucial questions which Joey and Piers and others are putting. They're absolutely reasonable questions. They're absolutely the crucial questions. Whether he can answer those questions by he and his independent members of his inquiry looking at everything that was said between Bush and Blair, insofar as we have any record on it anywhere in Whitehall.
But
whether that all then, and this is what Jeremy Hayward and Chilcot have to decide, whether all that should be word by word publicly
Let
available.
me hear from a couple of members of the audience. We'll go on to another question. You say over there on the right. The man with the beard. No, with the other beard.
Must be me.
Not your beard, his beard.
I think Piers, for the second time with me, has hit the nail on the head. And I think the reason we're not going to get the full conversations, the fully redacted versions, become public is because, number one, we'll actually find out the reasons we went to war, and number two, and I think this is the crucial thing, the public will realise that the national interest is not synonymous with the public interest. They will realise that the national interest, whenever the establishment talks about the national interest, it's from establishment to establishment, about protecting those people, you know, the highest end of power in Whitehall, and it's not about the public interest, because how could anybody argue that fully publishing in full these conversations is not in the public interest? And it also shows one more thing, that why are we not talking about declassifying the conversations between the Joint Intelligence Committee over here and the Director of National Intelligence in the US? Because it shows, as Piers rightly said, the intelligence was proved false, the dodgy dossier. It shows that the decision was taken at the top, and it was between two people who had a phone conversation where one probably said to the other, "I'm with you all the way, pal," and that's the reason.
But you will get them, but they'll just be 30 years. It'll just be however long it takes to get it. I mean, for me, the key thing is, obviously, when Blair said after 9/11, we stand by the shoulders of our brothers, or whatever the words were to that effect. And I would like to see if it's Blair following through on that, to say, well, we said we'd stand by you, and obviously, you know, the Americans using the premise of the 9/11 attacks to go and do what they want with their ridiculous foreign policy, and whether Blair has actually tried to talk Bush out of it, whether Blair has actually agreed with him. I mean, I'd just like to see that, because people have lost their lives. I want to know why they've lost their lives.
The woman there on the left, in green.
I wonder if there's a sort of tapping into the disconnect that people feel with their parties, that there's a kind of a quid pro quo that needs to happen if our phone calls and our emails and our communication is going to be tapped at will, then surely that transparency should work both ways. We're in an age of Big Brother, that should work both ways. And